Good morning. This is Marshall Davis. Recently, I've been talking about how non-duality is integrated into and expressed in everyday life. In the past couple of episodes, I have been addressing moral and political issues that people are talking about in the news, such as politics and war. Specifically, I've been addressing the war in Gaza and dualistic American politics of right and left, conservative versus liberal, Republicans versus Democrats. And the responses that I have received to these episodes indicate to me that I'm not communicating very well, that non-duality is not a political position like other political positions. That's not a worldview or a philosophy or even a religion or an idea or a principle or something like that. And that means that I need to get back to basics once again. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I have said before, originally said in my book I wrote more than 10 years ago, Experiencing God Directly, that there are two approaches to awakening to ultimate reality: self-inquiry and God inquiry. We look inward in search of a self, and we look outward in search of God. And both inquiries end up in the same place: the realization that there is no self and no God. By that I mean there's no separate self and separate God as traditionally understood. When it's seen that there's no separate self and separate God, it is seen that there's no problem. All problems, including the problem of suffering and the problem of evil, drop away when reality is seen. Let me begin with self-inquiry, which results in the discovery of no self. Buddhists call this anatta. It's a mistake to think that anatta is a doctrine or a belief. It's something that's seen directly as reality. There is no self. Now, that contradicts what society teaches us and what many religions, including Christianity, teach us. We have been taught by society and by our parents that there is an individual self, separate from others. But when we look for this, we can't find it. There is no entity inside of us somewhere in our heads or in our hearts or in our souls that oversees our lives. No overseer, no personal decision maker, no homunculus inside our bodies pulling all the strings. Instead, the self is seen to be simply an idea. I liken it to an application, a software program developed by evolution that runs in the hardware of our brain. And it's a very useful application. It helps tremendously in our survival. It is responsible for our species arising from a physically weak and vulnerable hominid to becoming the dominant species on the planet. In the words of the book of Genesis, we have become fruitful and multiplied. We have filled the earth and subdued it. We have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And the results for the earth has been disastrous. But when we look carefully for the self, it disappears. It is seen to be nothing more than a label that has been applied to the process of being human. The self is not an entity and not in charge of anything, not even in charge of the ideas that come to mind. Ideas just arise unbidden. We don't have any control over them. And we're not in control of the body. We have no control of the functions the heart beats, the lungs breathe, and the blood flows, and the digestive system digests, and the urinary tract processes, and the kidneys and the liver and the pancreas and every other organ works automatically without any direction from us. Now, we do seem to have some limited control over some things. I can decide, it seems, when I'm going to go for a walk today, and whether to lift my hand now, or what I'm going to have for lunch. But even those are not so much under our control as we think they are, as evident in the inability of most people to lose weight, or to stop smoking, or to exercise more, or control our tongue, or anything. Any control, if it exists at all, is limited. And it's not the personal self, often called the ego, that is in control. The decision-making process is much more complex and much deeper than that. The ego, which is the personal self, is just along for the ride. It's just a passenger on this journey called life. It has very little influence, and yet it thinks it's top dog. When we examine our decisions closely, we see that we are controlled almost completely by forces outside of our control that we're not even aware of, by instinct and emotions and fears and physical needs and psychological needs and social needs, and they work together and they balance each other out while the mind simply watches and tries to see what process is going on, and finally a decision is made, but not by us. There is a will, but it's not the ego's will, and it's not free. Scientific experiments have shown repeatedly that decisions are made on an unconscious level before consciousness becomes aware of it. When we look carefully at our life, we see we are not the self or the body or the mind. In fact, I was just reading that less than half of the cells in our body are actually human. Furthermore, we are much more than just this single human physical creature. We are more than what goes on in this body, in this mind. Our decisions are more controlled by forces outside the body than inside it. What we really are does not stop at the epidermis. The skin is not the boundary of what we are. On a physical level, there is continuous interchange between the body and the environment as far as air and water and everything is concerned. And without this air outside of us, we cannot exist, including air pressure that keeps us together. We are dependent upon the right mixture of gases in the air we're breathing, and upon the right temperature. It has to be within a certain range, and moisture and water and sunlight and nutrients and the food that we eat. And the more we examine this, the more we examine our lives, the more we realize that we do not exist apart from everything outside of the body as well as inside of the body. And that outside includes human society, without which we would not have survived a day after birth. It includes all of planet Earth, which itself is dependent upon the solar system, upon the Earth, and upon the moon, and so forth. What we are includes everything that we normally call the universe. It's all one. We cannot exist without the universe. We literally are the universe, made up of the elements of the universe. if we're going to talk about a self, then it has to be a universal self with a capital S. That is the whole self that makes decisions, not the separate little entity. We are the huge individual, huge universal, cosmic self. That's running the show with a capital S. This cosmic self is often called God. But this is not the God conceived of by Western religion. The theistic deity is a fiction made in the image of the individual separate self. We think of ourselves as separate, personal, individual selves, and that, therefore, we picture God as a big, separate, personal, individual self, the big boss, the supreme alpha male, sitting in heaven, controlling everything, meting out reward and punishment. We have made this God in our own image and then turned around and worshiped this God, this idol. We're worshiping an ego, pattern after our ego. That's how egotistical we are. But that God is no more real than the human self, the human ego that is patterned after. When we look for such a being in the universe, we cannot find it any more than we can find a self in us. There is no self and there is no God. When we see this clearly, we also see that we are one with, identical with, the universal self, which is universal God. So there is a self, you could say, but it's the cosmic self. And there is God, but it is the cosmic God, God beyond God, not a being, but being itself, the ground of being. The self-realization of no self and no God paradoxically reveals true self and true God. And with this comes the realization there is no problem, no self, no God, no problem. No problem of suffering or problem of evil. How could there be? There is no theistic deity causing or allowing the suffering and the evil, hence no moral problem. There's simply the processes of the whole working together in a dance of duality, yin and yang, suffering and pleasure, right and wrong, good and evil, life and death, like a swirl of patterns on a weather map. We are this whole. And when we identify as the whole and not as a separate little part, then all the philosophical and theological and emotional and psychological problems are seen in an immensely bigger context. And seeing from that context brings peace. That context is love that includes and resolves all lesser realities. That context with a capital C, for want of a better term, is what I call God. And that is all there is. And that is all there is for today. Grace and peace to you.